Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So on the agenda tonight, we have Gordon Lightfoot and this is going to be his performance of If You Could Read My Mind. So let's get Gordon up on screen and see how he gets on.
What a tale my thoughts could tell. Just like an old-time movie about a ghost from a wishing well, in a castle dark or a fortress strong, with chains upon my feet. You know that ghost is me, and I will never be set free as long as I am a ghost that you can't see. If I could read your mind, love, what a tale your thoughts could tell. Just like a paperback novel, the kind in a drugstore would sell. When you reach the part where the heartaches come, the hero would be me. The heroes often fail, and you won't read that book again because the ending's just too hard to take. I walk away like a movie star who gets burned in a three-way script. Enter number two, a movie queen to play the scene of bringing all the good things out in me. But for now, love, let's be real. I never knew I could feel this way, and I've got to say that I just don't get it. I don't know where we went wrong, but the feeling's gone and I just can't get it back.
I'm just going to jump in here. I suggest that you watch this the whole way through. I'm going to put the link to it in the description below so you guys can just enjoy the song the whole way through. But I just want to jump in because it's very specific to this track. And a lot of you will know the track by Whitney Houston called Greatest Love of All. And that track has got an absolute carbon copy of Gordon's vocal melody, but also the chord progression underneath that vocal melody, and also some of the vocal phrasing that Gordon's putting in here. So it is so close that Gordon actually took the writer of that song to court in 1987, because you will know this melody from the Whitney Houston track probably if you haven't heard Gordon's stuff before. Of course, Whitney Houston didn't write that track, so Gordon was taking the original writer to court, but inevitably Whitney Houston's name got dragged into it in the news, and she's getting a lot of bad press as being an artist that potentially plagiarized another artist. So Gordon dropped the charges, he dropped that lawsuit on that original writer because of the effect it was having on Whitney Houston's name. And just from a perspective of a musician, you'd say, what a nice guy to really be looking out for another musician. But how many record labels would have dropped a lawsuit like that when it is abundantly clear it is a rip-off? It's an exact copy of the melody and the chord progression and the expression of Gordon's original work. It's something that I don't think would happen nowadays, because the record company and the management company would absolutely pursue it, especially when it's so clear-cut as this, and they'd be well within their rights to demand a percentage of all the money that that other song made, because it is such a big part of the track. And in the original case, Gordon said that that other song by Whitney Houston, not written by her but released, takes 24 bars of my original song. And he's absolutely right. I mean, 24 bars is a hell of a lot. Sometimes you just hear a riff that somebody might say that's been plagiarized, whereas here we've got such a large part of the song. Another thing to mention here quickly is that Gordon's playing and singing at the same time, which doubles the difficulty. I always say this, but in the background we have got another player, another rhythm guitarist. You can hear some slides and a little bit of lead work that we just heard there that Gordon isn't playing, and that's just happening in the background. There's also a bass guitar in there as well, and the mix is really subtly done. It is so well mixed for Gordon's performance so that that vocal really does shine. One thing about Gordon's vocal that I want to point out, of course he's got that fantastic delivery, but he's also got a unique vibrato in his voice in exactly the same way that when you listen to a guitarist playing lead guitar, and the way that they vibrato gives that guitar a voice, and it makes their playing sound like they're playing because of their vibrato, their expression. And Gordon's got exactly the same thing. Singers are exactly the same. They all have their own expression, and Gordon's vibrato here just absolutely comes in all the time. It's just something that is part of his voice, and it's not something that he's putting on, it's just the way that he sings. If he was trying to add this technique on as an afterthought, then it wouldn't be as honest, or it wouldn't sound as honest because it would be contrived. Whereas Gordon just absolutely sings the way that he does naturally. Let's watch the video until the end.
You could read my mind, love. What a tale my thoughts could tell. Just like an old-time movie about a ghost from a wishing well. In a castle dark or a fortress strong, with chains upon my feet, the story always ends. And if you read between the lines, you'll know that I'm just trying to understand the feelings that you left. I never knew I could feel this way, and I've got to say that I just don't get it. I don't know where we went wrong, but the feeling's gone, and I just can't get it back.
And there it is, that voice. Maybe you were listening to that vibrato because it gives it such a unique flavor and a unique sound, just in the way that sometimes a guitar player has a distinctive tone to their guitar in exactly the same way that a singer will have a particular tone to their voice, so you can start to set them apart. Gordon's one of those singer-songwriters who just writes about his own personal experiences and is a great storyteller. I had a video on James Taylor last night, very much in that same bracket, but the way that Gordon is writing these lyrics, he's actually talking about his divorce. And again, a really personal subject to be writing about and singing about in front of thousands and thousands of people. You're showing your heart and your emotions to the audience, and that is what is so authentic about singers and songwriters like Gordon. I just want to mention something interesting about this track in particular, because If You Could Read My Mind as a track was a real turning point for Gordon. I think between 1970 and 1971, it actually sold over 1 million copies, so it was a big hit for him. But the interesting thing is that it was already on an album. It had already been released on his album called Sit Down, Young Stranger. And it's funny how a track has got the potential to be a huge hit, but that album didn't sell well at all, so nobody knew about it. So once the track started to get around a bit and a few people started to like it, and it started to get more coverage, and the ball started rolling to the point where the record label released the exact same album that was released before that didn't perform very well. They released that as If You Could Read My Mind. They changed the name of the album, and that album got to number 5 nationally in the charts. Puts an interesting spin on things to think that there could be hundreds, if not thousands, of potential hits that have been written by independent artists, but they never got the spotlight. They never got that mainstream exposure, so a lot of people never got to hear those potential hits. They could even be sat in a drawer in the person's desk at home, just never to see the light of day. But this is the proof that until you have a song that gets some exposure, it potentially isn't a hit, because this was already out there, but nobody had latched onto it. In 1962, Gordon did have a few tracks that did well in Toronto, where he's from in Canada, but that was very much only local radio and local exposure. In 1963, he then travelled to Europe and the UK, and he actually presented a show, and that was the BBC's Country and Western show in 1963, but then in 1964, he returned back to Canada. In 1965, things started to pick up for Gordon because he signed a contract with the manager Albert Grossman, and he represented a lot of big folk artists at the time. So off the back of that, Gordon signed a deal with United Artists. So now with the backing of a record label, it meant that Gordon could get out there and get more exposure for his music, and he actually did appear on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. In 1968, Gordon released an album called Did She Mention My Name, and on that album there was a track called Black Day in July, which was about the previous year's 1967 riot that was in Detroit. And the following April, on the 4th, Martin Luther King was murdered. And after that, 30 radio stations pulled Gordon's track from the airwaves because they said they didn't want to fan the flames. The radio stations obviously didn't listen to the track because Gordon wasn't fanning any flames. He was saying the opposite. He was just trying to say, can everybody get on? Can we just live in harmony? But that track got pulled, and there's a great quote from Gordon after that happened. He said that the radio station owners were more concerned with playing songs that just made people feel happy than songs that actually made people think. And that is just Gordon and a lot of songwriters and a lot of storytellers in a nutshell. They're giving you stories that make you think. They're not just writing one-dimensional songs here. They're actually doing something artistically to get an emotional response from the listener. Unfortunately, Gordon released that album and that track through United Artists, but through this whole situation, he didn't get a hell of a lot of support from them. So he jumped ship and actually signed up with Warner Brothers Records. And that now takes me back to this track when it was released, because he signed with them in 1970, and this, from 1970 to 1971, then sold over 1 million copies. So Gordon jumped ship and then got his big break while he was signed to Warner Brothers Records. So then from 1970 onwards, and having that solid backing from the record label, he then got into his writing and released 7 albums in 7 years that all did really well, and he really established himself as a singer-songwriter. And he just kept singing and writing from there in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Unfortunately, in 2002, Gordon was seriously ill and had to go to hospital, and he was actually in a coma for 6 weeks, but fortunately he made it out of that. And in 2003, he had surgery. I think it was on that prior abdominal condition that he was initially in hospital for. In 2004, he released his album called Harmony, and that was what he was working on before he got ill. Now, in 2006, he was playing live and he actually suffered a minor stroke, which meant that he now couldn't use the ring finger and the third finger on his right hand. But just 9 days after suffering that, he got back on stage and just used a second guitarist instead to play the parts that he couldn't play because of that lack of movement that he had in those 2 fingers. Now, fortunately, in 2017, now he's got the use of those 2 fingers back, and he's back on the road, back playing, and he was back on the road last year, 2018, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's still going out on the road in 2019. He's 80 years of age now, Gordon is, so what an inspiration, just an all-round musician and just a great singer-songwriter who is still going up until this day. What a guy, and what a performance this is, and what a track this is as well. Really did kickstart his career in 1970 and 1971. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at. Keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!